Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A, and I'm your host, Peter Dixon. Very excited about today's program. Welcome to Season 13. Season 12 was a short one. And I'll be looking at, in this season, episodes from Season 2, which was our seminal series that really got SDA Q&A off the ground. I'm not going to talk much. I'm just going to get into it. I do want to just share with you one quick share screen thingy here. If you go to Wikipedia and look up Sanctuary Review Committee, I just typed in Desmond Glacier View and open up the Sanctuary Review Committee. And in there, just read the background, the Glacier View meeting, aftermath, and legacy. And you will have a complete introduction to what we are about to embark on. I was going to read it, and I thought, no, I want to get straight into the program today. And really have Season 13 be a 45th anniversary reflection of Glacier View by releasing each week interviews that I did in Season 2. We will still have our normal interviews, our normal Good News Fellowship gathering, but once a week I will be putting into our SDA Q&A live platform this content. It's a dream I've had for a long time, but today we finally get it off the ground. Where did it go though? Isn't that hilarious? Hopefully it's here. The little mention there of those. Right, I think I do have it. Yes. What was I going to say? I can't remember. Anyway, oh yes, a lot of these interviews, of the 86 that I did in Season 2, exploring Desmond Glacier View, before, after, everything in between, a lot of these interviews I never watched back. I interviewed the person and didn't watch back. The first two in the series I certainly did, because they were kind of edited and have been uploaded on the channel in other places. But I too am going to sit back and enjoy. Please feel free to comment and add your thoughts, because look, the reality is this information you're about to watch now is as fresh as it was 5 years ago, is as fresh as it was 45 years ago. And it continues on because it has never been addressed by the Adventist Church. So it keeps going. Okay, enough from me. Let's see if I can get this going, and enjoy and welcome. Those that sponsored the first episode. Thank you so much, you guys. Enjoy. So yeah, thank you. How convinced are you that something special and supernatural and unique happened on October 22, 1844?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that question.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm Peter Dixon, and we've got a very special Q&A today. In fact, the whole of May. We're reflecting on the 40th anniversary of Glacier View. Now, when I've mentioned that to some people, they've said, "What is that?" And others have said, "Oh, I'm fascinated." So today is going to be just a look at that event, some of the ramifications of the event, what led up to it. And I'm joined today by Dr. William Johnsson. Welcome to the program.
Most welcome indeed.
And you're okay if I call you Bill? I think we...
Oh yeah, sure.
And you weren't born a Seventh-day Adventist. I
No,
remember
no,
hearing...
I really, my dad was Adventist, but my mother never did become. I'm the youngest of 9 children and the only one to become an Adventist, except for my older sister who late in life, in her 70s, joined the church.
Interesting. And I listened to a sermon of yours, and you mentioned that your dad was very much loved reading the Bible every day, and you kind of picked up that passion from him.
Yeah. He was a man who never had much money, worked hard, working man, but he loved the Bible. And that was the greatest legacy he gave me, to read the Bible, which I follow and still do. Every year I read the New Testament twice in the original Greek and the Old Testament once.
You're of recent years, you've been involved or supportive of the One Project, and their focus is Jesus being the One. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with them?
Yeah, it was going for a number of years, and we saw it, but I really didn't know much about it. And then out of the blue, I received an invitation to speak at one of their meetings. So I went on their website, saw that what their mission statement was, to make Jesus number one in all things, personal and the corporate life of the church. I thought, man, I can be part of this. And so we attended, I think it was in Seattle. Nolan and I went along. We had just so much inspiration there, so much joy. When you just focus on Jesus, it was just amazing, that meeting. After that, we went to pretty well all the meetings that followed. I spoke a number of times, came to Australia with them. We had meetings in Sydney and then in Perth. I think it's one of the best things to come along in the Adventist Church.
So, yes, it was great. I remember watching your the talk that you did when you were here in Australia. I watched it on I think on YouTube, and it was fabulous to see you connecting and I guess tearing down the walls of all the generation gaps. You know, you're as much loved by the young people and every generation in between. And it was wonderful to see you embrace the One Project, but for them to be embracing you as well.
Yeah, well, it is. I tell you, it's brought so much warmth and inspiration to us. When they asked me to speak, knowing that many of the attendees would be so much younger than I am, I wondered, can I connect? But boy, it was incredible.
Yeah.
And it's been like that every time.
Yeah.
Every time. We have the great good fortune to attend a church that's sort of a One Project church. Tim Gillespie, who's one of the main speakers, is pastor of the Crosswalk Church. And now online, they have congregations all over the place, about 8 in the US and in South America, and I think maybe in England. It's just wonderful what's happening in the last 2 years.
Why do you think the One Project received so much flack from the church? They're bringing so much love and creativity and enthusiasm, but I stumbled across a series of videos, I think Amiga something, I can't remember,
Yeah.
I think produced by some independent ministries, fundamental independent ministries, and they were linking them with Jesuits and naming them and naming and shaming. Why do you think such an angry response?
Well, the various ways to answer that. One is, whenever the gospel is preached, clearly there'll be opposition, and sometimes violent opposition. That's sort of a simplistic answer, but I think it's valid. That's true in church history over and over. In terms of our church, I've been deeply disappointed that many of the people in leadership, and especially at the General Conference, have not seen light in this. To me, it's ironical. You know, the church is asked to pray for revival, and the Lord sends along something that will revive the church. I mean, we met people at the One Project who said, I haven't been to church for years. I'm going to come back to church. I'm going to attend services again. So, I mean, it was bringing renewal to the church. But it did not come from above. You know, it was not a program that came down from the top. So maybe that's part of it. But I don't want to sit in judgment because that's the Lord's task and not mine. But I just have puzzled over this. People not just not supporting, but actively working against it and giving a hard time to these young guys. I mean, they all had full-time jobs, but this was all add-on because they believed in it, extra work.
It's a wonderful story to read a little bit about the history of how they started and how they met in a hotel room and prayed for revival.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
And it's interesting. My understanding is that they even kind of had so much pressure that they stopped doing the meetings for a while.
Well, I think, I don't know whether that was the reason. I think they were getting tired. Instead of getting support, they were just getting so much bitter opposition. I mean, some really low-down stuff was happening. Even their kids were being abused on Facebook, you know. And when they'd be leaving a meeting, I know Sam Leonore, he's one of the 5 founders of this. He had his son with him. People came up and started, you know, just to curse him out. I mean, it's disgusting and wrong. So, but, you know, the other way of looking at it is they must have been doing something very right.
Something right.
That's bitter opposition.
Has the criticism only come from the fundamental ministries, or has it come from mainstream Adventist administration as well?
Yeah, it's come from mainstream, yeah. But not uniformly. Some conference presidents have been strongly supportive. At the General Conference, it's been mixed. Some support, others really, I think, wanting to shut it down, which I have never been able to figure. What I've seen of it, this is a movement of the Spirit. I think it's very, very dangerous to set ourselves up in opposition to a movement of the Spirit.
There's another group within the Adventist Church called Arise, which are more reflective of the conservative, but they're still appealing to young people as well. I personally think there's a place in the church for both Arise and the One Project, but I'm noticing that more and more people at leadership level within the Adventist Church are trying to perhaps shut down the One Project or put pressure on them, but are quite supportive of the Arise Project. Why do you think that is?
Well, that reflects...
Not Arise Project, Arise Movement.
Yeah. I'm not so familiar with the Arise movement. You know, again, I'm sort of a big tent person. I think it's good to have differences and, you know, not just have a single channel. But I think maybe, you know, there's theology involved here. The One Project is so centered on Jesus only, okay? It's not Jesus plus this and this and this, okay? It's Jesus only. And that troubles a lot of people. And I think the leaders who are scared of that. Interestingly enough, you know, Ellen White wrote, when she was in Australia, she wrote to a guy who was old, wondering what would happen after he died. And he said, my brother, I'm paraphrasing, you know, when you come out of the grave on that day, you'll have nothing to recommend yourself to Jesus. But if you have Jesus, that's all you need.
You'll have
Jesus.
everything.
You'll have everything if you have Jesus. Jesus is enough.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study, the conflict and the tension between the left and right within the Adventist Church.
It's left and right. And theologically here, it's sort of justification, sanctification, and that's a false dichotomy. But those who would oppose the one project would come down much stronger on what we have to do, what the Lord expects us to do. And some would take it all the way to, until we do this, the Lord won't come back, I think is terrible theology.
Is some of Adventism leans towards that kind of last generation theology in its very doctrine, though? Like, I remember the story of Ellen White doing a sermon where she said there will be people in this room that will be food for worms, there will be people that will be elevated to heaven, and there was those that will miss out, but that he will return before the people in this very room will die. He didn't return, and some kept a list of the names of people that were in that meeting, and when the last one died, there was much crying and gnashing of teeth. But Ellen mentions somewhere that the Lord hadn't returned to date because people weren't doing and following the teachings of the three angels' messages. What do you think about that?
I think that I'm a believer in Ellen White, but I don't think we should make her the foundation or the source of our doctrine. We are Protestants, and all our teaching should be based on the Scripture. Unless we find it in Scripture, don't put much weight on it, wherever it comes from.
Do you think, though, that within the DNA of Adventism there's a sense of, because we aren't doing what the message of Adventism is, the Lord's not going to return until...
I think that's changing very much.
I just realized I said all of that muted. Sorry about that. I was simply saying that a lot of, I will occasionally put a comment in, a lot of what Bill is saying right now, that Ellen White should be, in the back seat, and if what the Bible, if something she says is different to the Bible, go with the Bible. This big tent kind of narrative that he's trying to portray is one that is regurgitated by progressive Adventists a lot, and this is often where they get this material from, is people like Bill Johnsson. I'm interested in your thoughts as to how effective that has been 5 years on now, and he's reflecting often on a 1984 interview he did on the Ankerberg show. You'll hear more of that later. Just interested in your thoughts, because there are some real gems here that are coming up as to what are the conflicts and the narrative within the Adventist Church that certain people like Bill Johnsson and others that are more progressive, the big tent, Adventists, is what they say actually occurring in the church? I'll try not to interrupt much, but every now and again he just says some things here that I think are worth drawing our attention to. back to the show. Okay.
It may still be the case in Australia, I don't know. And certainly in certain parts of the world where the church is growing fast. It's, the church has grown and developed. Of course it must. It can't be static. Our background is, frankly, it's legalistic. 1888 was a turning point. And then through much of the 20th century, we were fundamentalists, okay? And began to break out of that about the 1950s, 1960s, when scholarship developed. More and more scholars received advanced training, and detailed studies were done of Ellen White. And you have people like George Knight and his books, which have really just blown open that whole fundamentalist approach with Ellen White. It's simply false. It's not true. Okay. And I don't know if you've seen a recent book. What did he call it? Ellen White's Afterlife, I think. Yeah. And he shows how during her lifetime, she was not made a source of doctrine. But after she died, for about 30, 40 years, more and more we tended toward inerrancy, perfect in word and in life and in doctrine. And then how the scholarship, going back to her manuscripts, studying them, just blew that out of the water. And so Knight says we have gone back to where the pioneers were in the 19th century. When I say we, not the church at large, no, but those who are reading and studying.
You mentioned that kind of revival of study in the 50s and 60s, and we're going to get to Glacier View in a moment. And I'm interested in your thoughts on the release of Questions on Doctrine in 1957, which really opened the way for an opportunity for the church to progress down the path that you're saying there has been change. But it also fired up people that wanted to go back to this golden era that you're speaking of post Ellen's passing. Can you lead into explaining what Glacier View was from the starting point of Questions on Doctrine, to give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, I can. On Questions on Doctrine, I was not involved at all in those discussions. They came in the 1950s. We were missionaries in India, came to the States in, what was it, 1975? No, it's 60. Sorry, no. Questions on Doctrine in the 50s, yeah. And I remember a student at Avondale College, I went to Avondale in 1957, and Questions on Doctrine was just out, okay? And Froome and Roy Anderson were going around promoting this book, and some people were very unhappy with it. There were big arguments. That was an important development in the Adventist Church. Looking back on it, it was important in its time. I don't think the scholarship was all that great. I don't want to, it sounds condescending to speak like this, I'm sorry. But I think, in terms of biblical scholarship today, we would say, they were good people, and they made an important advance. But I don't think, I think they missed important points there. And the people with whom they dialogued, Barnhouse and Martin, they were fundamentalists themselves. So you really have that fundamentalism still running. Now, more immediately, the Glacier View now, and that came in August 10 to 15, 1980, okay? And I know much more about that. I was there. had quite a major role in that. But what is often overlooked, usually overlooked, is that in the years immediately prior to Glacier View, there were developments in the Adventist Church that sort of set the stage for Glacier View. Let me just help you with this just very, very quickly. Throughout the 1970s, the Adventist Church, there were big arguments over righteousness by faith. That was the big one, okay? And curiously enough, you had the Ministry magazine on one side and Adventist Review on the other side. Ministry under Bob Spanier was emphasizing justification. Kenneth Wood and Review, they were emphasizing sanctification. And it was strong disagreement. And during those years, and Des Ford had many articles published in Ministry in those years. Anyway, it became really hot. Neil Wilson is elected he takes office January 1, 1979, and immediately he issues a statement, no more discussion about righteousness by faith. I'm going to deal with it. Now, Wilson, I knew him very well. You know, he was my boss for 15 years when I was editor of the Review.
Yeah.
And we climbed Kilimanjaro together,
Wow.
got to know each other very well, okay? But so quintessential problem solver. He loved problems. He figured he could solve any problem, big or small. So no more argument about righteousness by faith. We're going to solve it. So what does he do? And remember, it's first year of his presidency. He calls a big conference on righteousness by faith in Washington. About, must have been at least 80 people came. And all shades of opinion were invited to that, okay? Not all were church employees, but they had written or they were agitating. And so Wilson style, the first day, what happens? People just line up at the microphone and give their point of view. That's all we did for a whole day, you know. Then after that, he said, we're going to have 24, a group of 24 will follow on and try and build on this. And they became humorously known as the 24 elders, okay? And 3 of us from the seminary, I was teaching at the seminary at that time, professor of New Testament. And when we met a couple of months later, we talked a bit back and forth. And then he said, I'm going to appoint 3 people to be a committee to develop a statement on this. And he named Fritz Guy, theologian, Gerhard Hasel, Old Testament, Bill Johnsson, New Testament. We were colleagues together.
So this he brought this committee together after that day you had. What year was that?
Oh yes, a couple of months later. The 24 came together, and the 24 are still there. And then we were tasked, the 3 of us.
Right.
You know, you can't have 24 people write a statement. It doesn't work. So the 3 of us worked together, and in a remarkable way. If you ever get Fritz Guy on the program, he may tell you more about it. It was just incredible. But the way it worked, I mean, the amazing thing is, looking back today, Hasel was sort of the essence of the right wing, and Fritz Guy on the other side, the fact that they are working together. But that's the way it was before the scholar had become polarized. So I did the first draft. Fritz did the typing. I write longhand, that's how I write. And Hasel was looking up Ellen White quotations. And so we were able to bring it back within less than half a day. It was discussed and eventually voted. It was called The Dynamics of Salvation. And copies were sent out. It was published in the review. Copies went out all around the world. Feedback, but basically it didn't change. And that brought an end to righteousness, the controversy, 10-year controversy. Wilson solved it. He's a problem solver. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, I think this gave him the confidence that he could solve the next big problem when it came. And Desmond Ford, I think everyone will know about Des Ford. Charismatic theologian, captivating speaker, okay. Teaching at Avondale, then he was a polarizing figure also because of the way he presented his ideas. And he was sort of sent to PUC for a couple of years to let things cool down. And while he was there in 1979, on a Sabbath afternoon at a forum meeting, he gave this talk that brought the roof down. Okay.
So what date was that again? 1979 in
October. I'm not sure of the date.
And it was a forum meeting.
But of course, many of them are church employees. Des said later he expected a small group. But they had to keep moving one venue to another. About 1,000 people came out.
I heard that the venue was moved.
Someone recorded it. It went around the world. In this, he questioned sanctuary doctrine, especially the investigative judgment, so-called, and interpretation of prophecy. So, I mean, it was, Des was already had people strongly for him. He's a great preacher of the gospel, and people strongly against him already from the 1970s. And so now, the axes were sharpened.
This lit a fire.
Oh, did it ever? Yeah. Interestingly, at that, Glacier View came next year. So I wasn't there, but we soon heard about it at the seminary. And Wilson decided he would call a big conference, international conference, because the talk had gone around the world, to take up questions that Des had raised. They are major questions. They really went right back to the origins of our movement and teachings from the earliest days. Des was given leave, paid leave, to write out his ideas, 6 months to do that. And a committee was set up of 14 scholars to go over his it turned out to be 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
His book. Okay. To go over as he developed it, section by section. We met 3 times. I was one of them. And to give him suggestions, okay, which we did. I can tell you, he didn't change a word. We wasted our time. We spent a couple of days on each section and discussed, and some of the others, my colleagues, may not have put in any ideas, suggestions, but I did, and I know some others did at least.
I'm sure he considered them, though. He probably just
he did.
Of his resolve.
Yeah, but he was very sure about that he was right. Okay, and so he didn't change anything. So then this conference was convened in August 10 to 15, I think, of 1980 at Glacier View, which is like a retreat center run by the church, 9,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains out from Boulder, Colorado. Beautiful place, but high altitude, the people with a bad heart. The previous vice president, he couldn't come because his heart was bad, and so. But he did send a letter to be read, saying, "Watch out, be careful, for to stand by the truths." Sort of a letter of warning, which Neil Wilson read out. So there we met at Glacier View, about 115 people from all around the world, and variety backgrounds, ministers, administrators, theologians, scholars, some lay people. And we met for 5 days. We were told at the outset, this is not a trial of Desmond. He is not on trial. His views are to be considered. His views are on trial. Okay. And time was spent, most of it, in breakout groups, and key questions were put, and answers developed. And Wilson appointed a committee of 3 to be the writing committee. And guess who? The same 3 that worked the year before on Righteousness by Faith. Hazel, Guy, and Johnsson. And we followed the same format, except this time we had, statements that came from the breakout groups. And we tried to put them together and weld them together. And we developed what we called a consensus statement. That came, Glacier View, the conference itself, was scheduled to end at noon on the Friday. Okay. Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, I can agree with everything in this statement.
I'm not planning to comment much during this program, but that little nugget there is the central, I believe, in my humble opinion, the central lie perpetuated or begun by Bill Johnsson himself on the Ankerberg show in 1984, where he said to Ankerberg and I think Walter Martin that the scholars, etc., at Glacier View the majority did not see light in the teachings of Des Ford. Whereas on my show just there a few years ago, now that he's retired and older, he said not the majority did see light in Des's view. That consensus statement he refers to there was in 2 parts. And watch what happens next. I hope you're enjoying it. Please keep the comments going. And it's fascinating to kind of dive back into the history of this and to just hear that moment right there where in fact the lie at the center of Glacier View that the majority didn't go along with Des has now been revealed. And the truth is the majority did see light in it and could have gone along with it, including Des himself. Just imagine, and it could never have happened because what happens next, but just imagine an Adventist church that had kept Des Ford on board, what it would have been like 45 years later now. Couldn't have happened because of his questioning the authority of Ellen White. Anyway, back to the program. I hope you're enjoying it. Yeah, I understand that people left the meeting feeling quite positive about the consensus statement.
Yeah, but here's where things went off the rails, I believe.
Yeah.
So we're getting just an hour or 2 and the conference is going to end, and I'm feeling incredible relief.
Yeah.
Because it's been a week of high tension, high drama. And then suddenly another statement appears. I had no knowledge of it beforehand. It was a statement that had been prepared by a committee of 6 the day or the night before. And it had 10 points where Des Ford, his ideas disagreed with church teaching. And it was never discussed, it was never voted, it was simply read and taken away.
So who was behind that?
I would like to know. I'll give you my speculation, and remember, speculation. I think the leaders from Australia, where there was a lot of opposition to Des, that's why they'd sent him to Pacific Union College. I think they felt they had to go back with some decision to tell the people in Australia. And I think it was at their urging that this was developed. Mm. And the people who were involved in writing, the 6 people, for years I never knew who they were. They were never identified, okay?
To this day?
One was Norm Young. He could tell you, Norm Young.
Yeah. Just to quickly add there, in 2 or 3 weeks, I will be sharing the Norm Young interview where he does talk about this. And he believes, and he will say for himself in the interview, that he was thrown under the bus.
Avondale, he could tell you. I was shocked when I heard he was on it, because these 10 points became the basis for the stuff that Des was subjected to. That same afternoon, Friday afternoon, he was called before an administrative group, and with the Australians all there, of course, the Australian leaders. And this 10-point statement was the document that was used to really roast him. All sorts of things are said about Glacier View, and all sorts of people who are not there have all sorts of opinions on it. By and large, I'm much more positive than what many say. I don't think it was a set-up from the beginning. But I was at the time, and to this day, deeply disturbed by this statement brought in at the 11th hour, as it were, which to me was not following the pattern of Jesus to be open and straightforward.
If he thinks it wasn't a setup beforehand, how would Neil have been so prepared to have this backup plan? To me, in my humble opinion, it was clearly a setup. And I think you'll hear in my interview with Lyndon Rogers later on that there is I'm pretty sure Dr. Lyndon Rogers talks about a letter between Pearson and Neil Wilson, where they actually say there's got to be a line in the sand, and Des Ford, it needs to stop at Des Ford. So I would disagree. I don't know what Bill really thought himself, but I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this was a kangaroo court.
It just reeked of cloak and dagger stuff. That may be unfair. You could ask Norm Young or others, but I know Norm, I've heard him say, when I heard that he'd been in that committee, I said, how could you be part of that group? He said, we were led to believe that this statement would be used in a totally different way. And so he felt that he'd been used.
Wow.
So that has left to this day a very bitter taste in my mouth.
Yeah, understandable. I've invited Norm onto the program this month, so
good. Ask him about that. Yeah.
The climate in Kurumbong at that time, I was just a young teenager, and as a member of the church, we were kind of shielded from a lot of that. It wasn't really till the late 80s that my generation kind of looked back and realized we were right in the middle of it. And we kind of put a derogatory term towards the concerned brethren. We call them the CBs. And
Yeah.
I feel bad about that now, but I was young. We just saw them as being old fuddy-duddies that were worried about the standards of the church, whereas now we realise they were wanting to get their church back. And that's why I mentioned questions on doctrine, because the concerned brethren who signed that document, there's I think about 16 or 19 pastors that were concerned. They wrote this letter, I think, to Parmenter at the time, and they were very opposed to the new theology that perhaps grew out of questions on doctrine being released, and therefore I was just going to say, and most of them were from Kurrambong. There were lots of pastors there.
Yeah.
So maybe there was an extra special kind of aim at bringing Des down because he had been right amongst them here in Kurrambong.
Yeah.
Maybe they were putting pressure on people like Norm and people like Parmenter and Tolhurst. Maybe there was a lot of pressure coming from that group. Have you heard that before?
Sort of, but we've been too far away from it, to really follow up. And frankly, I was so drained by the Glacier View experience that I just didn't want to go there for years. Now, there's sort of a postscript to the Glacier View that maybe a lot of people don't know. Des was sort of given almost an ultimatum that Friday afternoon. And they said, take time to consider. He said, I don't need any time. And basically, he was on the way out from there on. But there was a vice president of the General Conference, Duncan Eva, who was the most learned in the scriptures and in the biblical languages of all the vice presidents. Very close to Wilson, very good friend. And Wilson looked at him. For at least 2 years after Glacier View, Duncan Eva continued to work to try to bring a reconciliation with Des. I know this because Duncan and I were also good friends. Okay. And there was a final meeting, and we met in San Francisco in a motel conference room, a small group. By that time, I think Calvin Edwards had joined Des. And that was sort of the last sad meeting when there's not going to be any reconciliation. Des had sort of hardened. And but Duncan, I just say that because I think it's important.
I just want to say something there. He was about to say that Des had hardened his heart. I never quite understood, or to this day understand, why progressive Adventists, when their ideas and beliefs are questioned, they throw in those subtle little ad hominem attacks. I just don't like that personally. And I think Bill was just about to kind of do that and kind of pulled himself back from the edge of it. And look, I really enjoyed my conversation with Bill Johnsson. We chatted after and before, and I mean, on that day that wasn't recorded. So I find a lot of things confusing where you can really like a person, but it just, and I saw Andy Mack comment earlier, where it just saddens your heart when people try and attack the person. Oh, Des, wrote this and wouldn't change his mind, and by then he'd hardened his heart. I just find that not true. Des was so not the kind of guy that had any kind of hardened heart. Having met him 2 or 3 times, I can confirm that. And then when you meet such wonderful people like Bill Johnsson, what makes us as humans stoop to that kind of foul play? Anyway, back to the program.
Some people think that Wilson was out to get Neil, Des, that Wilson set up Glacier View in order to get him removed. I don't think so.
He didn't want to get him removed, but he did want to kind of put an end to the discussion.
Yeah, and you see, he thought he could do this, as he'd done the year before with righteousness by faith. You see, but theology is not really, theological discussions don't work well with a group of 115 people from all sorts of backgrounds, and all sorts of agendas. So, it's like a management approach to theology, and that's not the way you do theology.
Yeah. Who were the people that met in that meeting, the reconciliation attempt meeting at the
last one?
Yes. Who was
there's just a couple of us.
Was Neil there as well?
No. Oh, no, I think he left it to Duncan.
Right.
Duncan, Eva, Elder Eva, and it was a very small group of us.
Because you were friends with Des, weren't you? He was a buddy.
We got back a long way. We were friends and colleagues, yeah. Now, I disagreed with him in a number of points, but we disagreed respectfully. And he did so much good for the church, I think, in bringing the gospel to people who never really found the gospel. And so for me, it was a tragedy. There's an Adventist tragedy. Guy of great abilities. But also, I got to say this, Peter, Des was not easy to help. If you want to sort of speak in more political terms, he was his own worst enemy, okay?
There we go. See, that's another example of exactly what I'm saying there. He was his own worst enemy, difficult to work with. I don't believe that people who have been asked to define clearly what they believe, which he did in his manuscript, the Glacier View manuscript, should be called difficult to work with. He simply was asked to clearly define his beliefs. And when asked in the afternoon to go along with the 10-pointer statement wheeled out, he just, I think, realized that they had it in for him. And Des Ford, I will not ever disparage. He was a man of honor, and he had a line in the sand that wasn't there to be difficult. And of course, he was flawed and human, like us all. But he was incredibly generous, gracious, and lived the Christian life so incredibly well. And I just find these lines of Des was his own worst enemy difficult to process.
I think for me, the critical moment at Glacier View and the saddest is one that Des remembered very differently from me, because I saw him on a program of yours some time back. He said at Glacier View he'd been treated fairly except for Wilson. Okay, Wilson was very unfair to him. And he referred to a meeting that came about Tuesday or Wednesday, and probably Wednesday, in which Wilson made a long appeal. Wilson never spoke short. He'd say, I'll give a few remarks, then he'd speak for 45 minutes. Okay, that's Wilson. Okay. But, he'd go everywhere, he'd cover all the bases. So anyway, he makes this long speech. It's like an evangelistic appeal. And it winds up like this. Now, Des, we're not asking you to go against your conscience, but will you take these ideas that you have, where others may not see light in them, will you just put them in your pocket and not promote them until the church sees light in them. So he makes this appeal. And Des simply walks out. Okay. Now that was the saddest moment to me.
I can't help putting my 2 cents in. Wow, I didn't realize until just watching, and this is one of the programs I have watched this one many times in editing it elsewhere. But he mentions that he watched or listened to an interview I did with Des on the podcast. So that's interesting. He was watching the aware of SDAQ&A, so that's good. But again, I can just imagine Neil Wilson saying, look, just put these ideas in your pocket. Can't you do that until the church sees light? Look, I am amazed at the patience of Des Ford. Bill says there that he walked out. He was just, I imagine, and I doubt it was a big huffy puffy walkout. I cannot go along with that. I'm sure Des didn't do that. But you just, Des could read between the lines. He can tell when someone is just saying, hey, don't be true to yourself. Just put it in your back pocket, mate. It'll be okay. And the church will eventually come around. Neil knew the church would never come around. They didn't want the church to come around. They wanted Ellen White's authority not to be questioned, and Des was seen as a big threat. So this kind of appeal to Des that Bill is saying was a wonderful appeal just doesn't carry water, in my humble opinion.
Because to me, Wilson put himself on the line in front of the leaders of the World Church. And it was like Des rebuffed him. Now, Des was under tremendous pressure. Maybe he misunderstood. And in that program that I referred to, he said he was treated very unkindly by Wilson. He referred to that moment. Okay. But, I just, that's Glacier View. So many different views. And as we were walking out, I walked out with Dr. Grady Smoot, president of Andrews University. And he said, this was so sad. Okay. We both felt this was the moment where, it could have turned around. If he simply said, yeah, thank you. I'll continue to study, but I won't promote these ideas. But anyway, other things happened after that day. But I tell you, to me, it was like a dagger in the heart.
They kind of said it was sad that Des didn't acquiesce and agree to go along with this. And Des was a man of great conscience and honor and virtue. What's sad is the way Des was treated, not that, oh, how sad that he could have said a few things a certain way and remained in the fold. Just doesn't cut it, I'm afraid.
Now,
a sad day.
Oh, it was a sad day. It sounds like I'm blaming him. And, he was under such pressure, so I just don't understand. I just don't understand.
Neil Wilson maybe a good politician at maneuvering events. He was keen to put an end to this discussion.
It's good to see the old me was picking up on this, even though I was in the early days of truly understanding the Adventist apologists' skills. I was picking up on it already back then. That's good to see.
And so maybe there was a little bit of behind the scenes work that ensured Des would eventually just throw up his arms.
I don't know.
Away.
I think if Wilson wanted to get rid of Des from the ministry, as is quite widely believed, I think it was an extraordinary way to go about it. To go to all expense, call in all these people. And then who's the committee sets up? They're not Wilson
a note came up there. It says Facebook user, and that was Gillian, and she mentions here when she watched this. When Bill mentions the Tuesday altercation, he sees it different to us. Wilson was very harsh. Luke turned to me, that's Des Ford's son, who was there as well, and said he really rough rode Dad. So I don't believe these versions that are being told of, hey, you know, that's Glacier View. Everyone had a different perspective. Yeah, sure, that's true. But the way this is being portrayed is that Des, oh, he was under pressure and he may have buckled a bit to that. And, you know, I don't want to judge him for that. This is classic ad hominem attack. Let's disparage Des and invalidate what he is saying.
Political type. 3 scholars from the seminary, okay. We're the ones who wrote this statement, you see. Why go to all that, you see? Again, though, the missing piece of the puzzle is that document never discussed, never voted, that became critical. That, to me, reeks of whatever. Not nice, not good stuff.
It'd be interesting to know, as you said, Norm felt that he was kind of perhaps used a bit there. It'd be interesting to know who was using him, who were the players that used Norm.
Well, I am almost 100% certain that the initiative for this statement came from the Australian leaders.
Right.
I'm almost 100% sure.
Now, one of the really sad things about it was many, many young Adventist ministers left. And as I said, I was just a teenager. And in Cooranbong, here in Australia, near Avondale College, we had a very vibrant youth kind of program, mainly because of lots of really great young Adventist ministers. From the Central Coast right up to Newcastle, there was always social events, music programs. It was amazing. It was like the One Project kind of environment. And I just remember noticing all of a sudden all the young guys left. And I remember sitting there one night and our only social engagement was table tennis once a month, Tuesday at the Memorial Youth Hall. And I thought, what's going on? But I was too young to really put it together, but now I know. But what a tragedy to lose so many young ministers as a result of Glacier View.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's, there was an informal conference convened last October, 40 years to the day, was the actual date, 40 years along from this Sabbath afternoon forum presentation that brought the house down. There were no papers, there was no minutes were kept. It was by invitation only, 2025, historians and theologians. And we reminisced about Desmond, Ford, and about Glacier View.
Wow.
Trying to figure out how important is history. Okay?
Yeah.
Looking back. Some there said, this is the most important event in our history. I think, but then at the end, again, there were no votes or no minutes, okay. We didn't decide whether it was or wasn't. But the general consensus was, we are still too close to it to really be able to judge its importance. It was very important. I think it ranks with 1888, but it's more important than 1888 or not, I don't know.
It's possibly more important in a way that it's kind of split the church in two without the members even realizing it.
Yeah, especially in the South Pacific, you know, it's just, and the healing is, the split has never been healed there, the wound.
No.
Which to me is...
And our leaders tend to not want to talk about it at all. It's very difficult to
that's right. Don't talk about it.
Speak about it.
Yeah.
Can I just shift gears for a moment? still relating to this. I've watched maybe 20 times in the last 4 years the John Ankerberg interviews. There's one with him and Des, there's one with you and Walter Martin, there's one with...
Just before we get on to the Ankerberg stuff, I just want to point out what Bill was saying there is, it just seems like it's an Australian thing. This is not true. It is it's a global Adventist thing. And where I said there that, the Adventists don't kind of realize the church split after Glacier View. It split, and then they don't realize that it did. There's two different theologies, in my humble opinion, and it is not just a larrikin Australian thing. They're trying again to make it seem that it's something that it's not.
Walter Ray and Des. And
yeah.
they're about an hour and a half long, and I've just, for some reason, found them a really rich resource of information. Now, again, I'm not bringing up questions on doctrine it just seems to me a pivot point for the current tension. That's the only reason I keep bringing it up. When I watch these interviews, I'm aware that because of the release of Questions on Doctrine, the church went from perhaps 1 million members to, by the time you were on the Ankerberg show, to about 4 million. So the kind of new theology, the presentation of Adventism is a little bit more evangelical. Those that don't know much about Questions on Doctrine may not realize that the book put forward Adventist in a better light. Barnhouse and Martin were about to release a book including Adventists about the cults, and they were going to include Adventists as a cult.
That's right.
And
Martin wrote the book, The Kingdom of the Cults.
That's right.
Chapter on Adventism.
And of course, Adventists were like, whoa, we don't want to be considered a cult. So that book addressed that, and Walter Martin went away saying, well, perhaps, yeah, you're not a cult.
What do you think? He put us in the appendix.
He did.
He kept us in the book, but we moved to the appendix.
It's a sect, not a cult. And he, so in some ways, the book created this kind of pathway for a more academic approach that Des brought to things. People began really digging deep into righteousness by faith and Adventist doctrine and new theology, and perhaps one project can find a link back to the positive nature of that, and perhaps more conservative groups can link it back to the Concerned Brethren and the Standish Brothers and whatnot. But the church did grow a lot during that time period, and I just want to briefly touch on your interview with Ankerberg, because I noticed that Walter Martin seemed to have a particular feeling that maybe he'd been duped a little bit. And here we are, was it 1984-ish?
It was 84. By now I was editor of the review.
Of the review. And
still young and somewhat foolish.
How old were you in 84?
Well, when I say young and foolish, I was not all that young. I was early 50s. But
that's still young.
No, early 50s. Yeah.
So as you're going into this meeting, the Adventist Church was at the crossroads. I think Time magazine had put Adventist on the cover of one of the magazines. We had the Des Ford thing was going on. The attacks on Ellen White regarding plagiarism was going on. The Davenport financial disaster fiasco was going on. And then you're put in the seat. And I thought you were very brave to even accept that, but good on you. I think a lot of people were invited and turned down, but you didn't. So I just want to, just with a little bit of that background, I want you to talk about your feelings of that show, Walter Martin. What was it like meeting John Ankerberg, who's still doing amazing work to this?
It's still going.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that experience and how you felt being put on the spot.
It was one of the toughest experiences of my whole life, maybe the toughest, okay?
Yeah.
In some ways, I was disappointed. I felt I'd been somewhat tricked.
Right.
I'll give you a little background, okay?
Yeah.
So I'd never seen the show, okay? I never didn't know what it was until I got a letter out of the blue from Ankerberg's producer, saying that, listing all the people that they invited. There was a whole string of them, and week by week, they would read out this list. It looked like the Adventist church was chicken. Okay.
Right.
And so I got this letter. Well, it was a copy of a letter to Neil Wilson, requesting, president at the General Conference, requesting that he appear. And if you could not do that, Dr. William Johnsson would be acceptable. So I went to Neil. There's no way that, the president should ever walk into that sort of scene. And by now I was feeling, frankly, a bit angry. Okay.
Yeah.
Because here,
afterwards, you mean?
What's that?
After the meeting, or as you became aware of it? By what was going on, the fact that all these leaders were being named, invited, and no one would appear. Okay. Right.
All turning it down. We look like, what sort of people are we, Adventists? We have the truth. We're ashamed to stand up and speak what we believe. So I went to Neil, and he said, of course I can't appear. But he said, if you would, he said, it'll be a setup. But if you can only come across as someone who really believes the gospel, a true follower of Jesus, that will be enough. That was his suggestion to me.
And Bill was saying that when he was doing the show, he felt, hang on, this is a setup. Well, he's saying here that Neil had already told him it's going to be a setup, but at least present the gospel. Let's carry on.
Now, sort of young and foolish in that sense, not politically hardened. Okay. Really didn't know what I was letting myself in for. It's television, and television thrives on controversy. Okay?
Bit of drama.
Not on making pieces, on us against them, Yeah. Anyway, so in preparation for it, I got access to some of the talks Martin was giving and they were recorded in different venues around the country. You see, this is now in the 1980s. Questions on Doctrine, that went through hundreds of thousands. Mass printing of that book went everywhere, subsidized by the General Conference. Huge impact around the world. Martin's book is now due for reprinting, and he's getting second thoughts and starting to make noises that maybe he'll pull us out of the appendix and put us back in, because we've sort of retreated from Christians on Doctrine and gone back. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the background.
And some would say he had a leg to stand on.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I'm working with the producer, is the one notifying me. We'll fly down. It was Chattanooga, Tennessee. It'll be taped on a Monday night. Come a day early, so you'll be rested up. Sunday night, we'll meet you at the plane, put you in a motel, and then on Monday, you and Martin can sit down and you meet Ankerberg, have lunch and get acquainted. So, okay, all went, according to the plan, at least on the Sunday. Monday, I'm waiting for the taxi or the car to come and pick me up. I get a phone call and meet the luncheon appointment. We'll meet tonight. We'll have supper together. Okay. I began to feel there's something not quite right here. So with a few doubts, I came to the evening, and what happened? Another phone call. Sorry, the supper is off. Okay. we won't be able, no time to get together.
And
I did not meet Martin until we went before the cameras.
wow.
To me, that was, I don't know, you make of it what you like. To me, I felt I'd been misled
Yeah.
and
Set up a
perhaps
bit.
betrayed. Okay. So Martin, big burly guy, and he had a big cross around, big metal cross. And when he'd lean forward, it would go clank and hit the microphone, and eventually they had to take it off. Almost his approach was sort of bullying. Okay?
Yeah.
And maybe that came across. It was.
Yeah.
And Ankerberg, I could hardly stop looking at him. His hair was so white, is this guy for real or what? So here's the way. We're going to tape in 15-minute intervals, okay? Martin will have a say, and then you'll have a chance to respond. So after the introductions, Martin begins. He comes out with a whole, potpourri of statements, which he has taken from Adventist publications. They're not falsified. And frankly, embarrassing statements. Statements, some of them went back to old writings, like Bible readings, the home circle, which makes Christ a created being, really embarrassing stuff. So he goes on and on and on, about 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, boy, how do I begin to answer all these, And so Ankerberg says, okay, Bill, here's your chance. So I start to respond and say, cut. Okay, great.
Oh.
So Martin gets 10 minutes, so I get 2 minutes. I thought, what is this? I said, and then this is the way it went. Then by the second, after the second 15-minute segment, they had a little longer break. I went to Ankerberg and I said, look, this is not fair. Okay. I'm not given a chance. Martin is dominating. He said, well, you should interrupt him. You should cut in.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was frankly getting angry. The longer it went, I felt the misgivings I'd had the night before, or the morning before when the lunch was cancelled. I began to feel this thing was a setup, In the breaks, Martin and Ankerberg huddled, and they had cue cards. They were exchanging who was going to ask what. Okay. So Ankerberg was not the anchor at all.
Yeah.
In some ways, he was more than Martin. So that's the way it went. It went on the taping went on for, I don't know, until after 10 o'clock at night. And I got very tired and just wanted to get out of there.
I think it was good that you kept bringing back to saying, look, it's not what this person says or that person says. Let's go back to what the 27 or whatever, how many
there was 27 at that time. That was my defense.
To that.
And then later, some people seeing the show, some editors said, all you can talk about is the fundamental beliefs. I said, but they are the only official statements, the voted statements. Whether whoever said this in the ministry or review, that doesn't have the same weight as the official voted statement from the General Conference session. So they cut it up into 5 segments. We taped for several hours. They did not distort my words, but they left out stuff where I scored points on nothing.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that they'd actually edited. I knew they edited between the programs. It was all one night, but they did it over 5 weeks, made it look like 5 weeks. But
it did. Yeah.
I didn't realize they actually cut during the program.
Said, we're going to have questions, and so they have people standing at the mic. There's no one standing at the mic right until the very end. There were no questions until almost the end. But at one point, Martin got into the book of Hebrews, and he quickly got out of that.
I noticed that, because that's
you
kind of
notice
one
that?
of your fortes
Yeah,
of study, isn't it? The Hebrews.
yeah. My doctoral dissertation was there. Yeah.
And I noticed that he started, and you then went, well,
That's,
actually, this is
yeah,
what it possibly says. And he just suddenly changed tack. He got out quick there.
yeah. There's other stuff like that. So, but they did not distort my words. They didn't sort of cut and splice.
No.
They had me say things that I really didn't say. But I don't know. I have very mixed feelings about it.
Mm.
I came back to the room. I didn't sleep the whole night because under the pressure, those hours, I wondered if I said something, inadvertently, that the enemies of the church can use against the church. If I betrayed my church, betrayed my Lord. And I couldn't think of anything, but the whole night, my brain was going over, I never slept the whole night. The reaction to it was very interesting, Peter, because I got some very negative letters from people, Adventists, who said, you've let down Ellen White for the world,
I think, though, if you stand up and speak your truth, I think that's what is important. And I felt good on you. No one else is willing to get up and speak their truth.
Kenneth Wood, who is now ex-editor of the Review, he was not happy with it. Somehow he knew what had happened. By the next morning, he knew what I'd said. So I don't know how he got access to that.
Wow.
He was the chairman of the White Estate Board. I was a member of the board.
And what did he say to you?
Well, it was sort of, wasn't directly. It was just sort of what was said and then not said, And so I had a chance to uphold Ellen White, and I dropped the ball. But one question in particular focused that, Peter. See, in hearing tapes of Martin's talks, me giving around the country prior to my appearance on the show, one of the questions he asked was, is Ellen White an infallible interpreter of Scripture? That was one of the key questions.
That was a big one.
His big one. That was sort of like his ace. Okay, that was his key card. So eventually, he has this, at some point in the program, he has this long build up, and then he, sort of looks at me, is she an infallible interpreter of Scripture? And I said, no.
I know.
I said, what?
Yeah.
But Bob Spangler said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so. I said, I do not believe she's infallible interpreter of Scripture. But of course, there are a lot of Adventists who did believe that. And
That's interesting there. I hadn't picked up on that during the interview, where every criticism he was given wasn't about him standing up for the gospel or, positively referring back to the 27 fundamentals at that time. Every single one he mentioned there, 3 or 4 people were upset that he hadn't used the opportunity to uphold Ellen White, or that he'd put her in a bad light, this kind of thing. I thought that was an interesting observation there that I hadn't noted before. And that's what it's all about. It's all about Ellen G. White.
we still believe that.
And John Ankerberg suddenly leapt in and said, now I'm a bit worried about your position. You might go the way of Des now.
He said that, yeah.
I thought you answered that pretty well, though.
I think I'm ready to go back and listen to it after.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to hear it. It was so painful.
You were gracious in taking it that you don't have a fear because you feel that you're accepted within your church, and that it's okay for people in the Adventist church to share different viewpoints. He then did say, well, what that didn't happen to Des. it was interesting because Walter Martin raised a little bit about plagiarism. I'm not going to go, that's for a whole other conversation. But they touched a little bit on the Davenport thing.
Yeah.
Just a quick aside for 1 minute. What are your thoughts on that? That
The Davenport
yeah,
fiasco.
it just kind of disappeared and no one was ever really held accountable for it. How did that happen? Because my understanding is
Yeah,
actually some of the church's money was used. It wasn't just people falling for a Ponzi scheme. Actual church money to
that's true.
upwards of $20 million, 1978, $79, which is a massive amount of money.
Much of that was recovered, I believe.
Because I think Neil Wilson said they were going to do an investigation, but there was never any release of the results of the...
There was an investigation.
There
and
was?
the chair of that committee was an Australian, the treasurer, Lance Butler. Okay.
Oh,
I know this because I'm sharing a lot of stuff here tonight today that maybe a lot of people don't know about. Most people don't know. I was in my first year editor, okay, when the Davenport scandals broke in the year before. I was associate editor 2 years. Now I'm editor, okay. And the committee set up, chaired by Lance Butler, votes that the names of the offenders, if you like, will be published in the review, and which is like public shaming, okay. So I was out at Loma Linda for a meeting and had a call from a reporter, one of the papers out in the West, saying, "Is it true that the review is going to publish the names?" I said, "Yeah." Okay, I was quite clear on it. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to get things happening to my conscience. Is this the role of the church paper, to shame people who do wrong? It came to the point where after some time, I went to Neil Wilson. We used to meet every week or so, a brown bag lunch in his office, bring sandwiches. So I went to him to say this: "Neil, if you want me to publish those names, it'll have to be someone else. I'm out.
wow.
I'm not going to publish that." But that's the speech I had made.
Yeah.
Before I could ever get it out, he says, "Bill, I've been thinking about those names.
Right.
I don't think we should publish them in the review."
Was there a behind the scenes, did they get told off? Did they lose their jobs? Did they go to
Some
jail?
did, yeah.
Did they have to...
Some were demoted, yeah. But I'll tell you something else. The list of names that was originally drawn up, upon further investigation, some of those names were crossed off.
Oh, okay.
Considered not to have misused their office. So, think if those names had been published,
Yes.
it's unforgiving.
Yes.
Once it's out there, you can't, even if you print a retraction saying they shouldn't have been there, it's there forever.
The mud would have stuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were the names mentioned in Pirates of Privilege by Walter Ray?
In what? What was that?
So Walter Ray, that wrote The White Lie, didn't he write another book called Pirates of Privilege?
I never saw that book.
Apparently he was going to release it, and the church threatened to take away his sustentation or something, and so he promised not to release it. But after he died, his son released it online. It's available for free online if you just search Pirates.
Legally the church cannot take away sustentation here in America. The church cannot take it away. It used to be like that.
It intrigued me why he didn't publish it.
No, I'm not aware of that book.
Right.
Walter Ray, I was involved in that one too. I was on the committee that had the initial hearing. That, Ray was an interesting character. It's sort of how often people go from one extreme to the other. people who knew him said he used to go to the pulpit with an arm full of red books when he preached, okay? But, you know, he flipped from being like a verbal inspirationist, every word inspired, to rejecting Ellen White. Just
pointing out the little subtle ad hominem attacks there. He flipped. He was just kind of this person that didn't seem to have stability. Again, Adventists, as good as they are, seem to default into that kind of narrative, which I think's shameful.
But his
It may have been
research
such a shock for him, though. Like,
oh yeah,
I know when I read that book, I actually had to stop reading it, and I didn't read it again for about 4 years.
oh yeah. But this was the myth of Ellen White that was current there for 50 years during the 20th century.
That relates to the 1919 conference, doesn't it?
What's that?
It relates to the night where
indeed.
they discussed that very thing, and I think the actual minutes for the meeting weren't discovered till about 1976.
That's right. They were put away in the archives in a dark corner.
How many other dark corners are there?
when they were, I shouldn't have said dark corner, but you know, when they were discovered, it was Don Mansell, I think, discovered them. He didn't do anything about it for a couple of years, you know. But then I think it was Don McAdams, who was then teaching history at Cambridge University, played a major role, you know, with that, and then with study of great controversy in Ellen White's use of sources, which is really heavy, word for word, you know. Plagiarism, we have to say today, you know. But so the myth of Ellen White, you know, was exploded by Ray, and there's a whole series of others. And I've got to say this, in the White estate at that time, the secretary was Bob Olson. He was there, I think, for 19 years. And Olson, he had moved from a fundamentalist view, first of all, of Scripture and Ellen White. In his doctoral studies, he was exposed to the, if you like, not the problems, but the evidence of Scripture, which you cannot believe in verbal inspiration or fundamental if you really go back and study Scripture, especially in the original. And so he did his doctoral studies in Dallas, Texas, and his views changed. And so he's at the White estate at a critical time. And during that period, the view of Ellen White just changed dramatically. But, you know, that's an oversimplification. So that's why George and I would say we've come back, those of us who are read and informed, to the 19th century view of Ellen White, which is more accurate view.
Do you think with the release of the compliance document becoming a policy or a document that now has teeth, do you think that's kind of going to turn Adventism into one big 3ABN kind of fellowship?
Oh, I hope not. Does it have teeth?
Well, were the 6 unions warned already? And I felt so sorry for Jan Paulsen when I watched the Autumn Council, where he was pleading with these guys to not go down the path they were going. And I think Ted Wilson just went, okay, thank you, but you all voted for it last year. Well, and I thought, wow, yeah, bit disrespectful.
Yeah, well, you know, once I was part of it, you know, I was in the General Conference for 25 years and, you know, involved in some pretty heavy stuff. That was my life, okay? But I look back on it now and I don't miss it at all. They're good people there and they mean well, but it's a bubble, okay?
Right.
the real church is the local church.
If you're in a union and you're sanctioned, then that'll trickle down to you keeping control of your conferences, and that'll trickle down to the grassroots church members too, won't it? Like women's ordination. If your union is warned because you're not because you're supporting it, then that'll affect the conferences and that'll affect the grassroots people. Don't you think it's a trickle down effect?
Peter, you need to spend some time here in California, in the Pacific Union. Okay.
Yeah.
The Pacific Union is a big union and contributes a lot of money to the Treasury. We have Pacific Union College, we have Glacier University, we have Loma Linda University, premier health institution. And frankly, Pacific Union does what it does.
So
the General Conference needs the Pacific Union more than the Pacific Union needs the General Conference.
Just again, a little comment. This is current me commenting on the interview there as I pause it for a moment. I wonder, and it's sad that Pastor Johnsson has passed on, but this idea 5 years ago, I think it was, that, the PUC, they do what they want, and, it's a wonderful, flourishing kind of big tent kind of Adventism. I wonder how Pastor Johnsson would have felt about the Rein de Bruinsma scenario that happened recently. What would he feel about the leadership's totally controlling his meeting and moving? He had to move it elsewhere. How would Pastor Johnsson feel now? And I predicted to him that I don't think PUC are as free and able to do whatever they want. I mentioned that to him back then. I don't know if it was live or but that my prediction has come true, that the very people in these wonderful parts of America that have more freedom, and the big the Adventist big tent concept is flourishing. Pete, come over here and you'll see a whole different kind of Adventism. And it turns out that actually, no, that is fading too. So I wonder what he would have thought now of the continued silence and suppression of the very folk that he was saying have a lot of freedom and power.
It's not a threat. It's reality. It's reality.
It's not reality.
When the GC sessions hopefully commence after the COVID crazy has passed, will Ted Wilson be president again, do you think?
I don't think so. But who knows? But it doesn't... I used to think a lot about these things. Not much anymore. We have a wonderful church we attend, and we have our ministry. I'm writing, I write most days. I write and do some speaking, and we're very happy. Okay.
You meet in a really nice a Sabbath school gathering as well. I've watched a few of your interviews and presentations there. It sounds like a great place to be. There's a similar one here at Avondale that meets every week.
Yeah, I've attended that one, yeah.
Yeah, is it called something 17, named after the lecture room or something that they attend?
I don't know the name of it.
It's a fascinating... I've been a couple of times over the years there.
Yeah.
You feel like you can speak with freedom and be accepted.
Oh, yeah. Most of the people are faculty members or retired faculty. Very interesting group, yeah. But thinking about Glacier View and so on, I had a position, it was really a privileged position, I don't want to make that sound as though I'm special or anything, but I was there. And so, I can give perspectives on Glacier View.
Exactly.
I'm sure that people who see this today who won't agree with some of that. That's fine, yeah, okay. Because the 1,000 different views on Glacier View, okay. Because I think it was a very, very important event. And I do think it was, I can only think about the might have been. If that paper hadn't been brought in, never voted, never discussed, which became the critical, it was sort of like the charge sheet against theirs.
This is the 10 point.
To me, that's a great statement.
Imagine, because my generation, we wouldn't have suddenly lost all the mentors. Like literally, we went from being 15-year-olds with people that were in their early 20s and people 30s to my next youth leader was 55 when I was 16, something like that.
Yeah.
So imagine if those 200 or however many people left had stayed.
Some conferences, they basically, a lot of ministers left. Others, the conference administration dealt with it differently, and folk, sort of worked things out continued on the ministry and became very important leaders, some of them. I was there at some of the workers' meetings, and they were hot. There was anger and there was pain. For a couple of years after Glacier View, that was my life. I was at the review, but I had many, many appointments. I come back and I was just drained because of all the stuff, the anger and the pain out there. I want to just say one last thing about Des, that I don't know if this is recognized or not. Des's views, by and large, have been accepted by the church. People who are listening will not want to hear that, but it's true, okay? Even, the real test of theology at the practical level, look at the hymns people sing. The hymns that are no longer in a hymn book that were there when I became an Adventist, okay? The judgment is set. How shall we stand in that great day? Shall we be found before him wanting? It's all uncertainty. We don't know, okay? That was the old church. And Des had a pastoral interest and concern because people didn't have the assurance of salvation. That hymn's not even in the book anymore, you see? So we've come a long way. And, I tried to tell Des, Des is still fighting battles in many ways. The church has gone on from me. But anyway.
Did you agree with his theology at the time? And if not, how did you do it?
Yes and no. He used to say, he said it often, and it made, I think, many of us mad, speaking of theologians. He'd say, all the theologians agree with me. Well, we agreed that he was asking the right questions, but we didn't agree with the answers he was giving.
It's a pity that Neil Wilson felt he really wanted to draw a line under it, because if his attitude had been, let's keep this going, let's keep it open, let's keep it inclusive, which I thought was kind of the direction the church was going when Jan Paulsen was president. There seemed to be an openness for both sides to still be welcomed into the church.
The pendulum swings back, okay.
Yeah. But you still have a sense of hope, though.
Oh, yeah, of course. I believe in Jesus. He's Lord of the church, okay. Whatever happens at the General Conference, okay, I'm confident. I'm hopeful. But I don't look to solutions to come out of the General Conference, okay? I think this COVID-19 is likely to impact the treasury of the church massively. So the General Conference is going to have to be cut way back. The money won't be there. And I think it's a good thing. In my book, I suggest it ought to be cut way back. Already they've voted that future sessions will be cut way back. It's just right out of what I advocate in my book. Right down the line.
Yeah. You predicted
So,
it.
and I don't know what the SPD is like now, but in many divisions, and I won't go beyond saying that, they're top heavy. There's way too many people at the top in administration. The real life of the church is the local church. And we've got to get more money back to the local church and support the local church pastor.
But the local church members are giving all their money to Doug Batchelor and Amazing Facts, and
that's another story.
So the money comes from the SPD into the local members. The members give it back to other ministries.
No, well, I'm a Big Ten person, though some of the theology that's out there, I think is terrible theology. It's just bad theology. Okay? And
how convinced are you that something special and supernatural and unique happened on October 22, 1844?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that question. The idea,
So I just have to stop that one. That's the big moment. That's the moment right there that that really SDAQ&A has continued to this day. That moment, that pause. I don't know if I can answer that. The core Adventist teaching, I don't know if I can answer that. And a quick aside, I remember when I asked that question, and I think, I won't say who it was because he may not want to get the publicity, but when I asked that question, I looked down at my monitor, which was just to the side here, and there were all sorts of gasp emojis just flying up in that kind of gap there. So I just wanted to highlight that moment. It was absolutely profound. And look, he is being of really good intention and good spirits in this conversation. I'm clearly enjoying it, and he and I are clearly getting on well. And there's lots of things he just said in the last 5 minutes that I just really agree with and think are fantastic. But I think that Big Tent Adventists, there's a new name for them, liberal, progressive, revisionist, gospel, Big Tent Adventists, they think that this dream of big Adventism is possible or is happening. And apart from small churches where cultural Adventism flourishes and there's no real theological debate or discussion, it's nice and happy, fun, tree hugging hippie Jesus places. They are nice places, but this notion of this big tent Adventism is clearly something that these guys have hope for, these liberal, progressive, revisionist, gospel, Big Tent Adventists. They really believe that it's possible. And they'll often say, it's happening in my little local church. Yeah, but it just doesn't appear to be possible on a big scale. Am I wrong? Tell me your thoughts. I could be wrong. Sorry for interrupting. Back to the program.
You've got to remember, I come at everything from a biblical basis, okay? And especially a New Testament basis. The Old is very, very important. They work together. The idea from a biblical point of view about a particular date in time, and remember, our thinking and our theology is so centered in America and American culture and American events that, I just can't accept it in the old way of thinking about it. I can accept it in the sense that I believe God is Lord of time, okay, and space. That things will not go on and on forever. That Jesus will come back. okay? And I can accept that we've come to a time when it's going to all wrap up. But beyond that, you know, we have big, big questions. We are now, look, nearly 200 years on from 1844. How can we say that he's coming soon? Okay. He's been saying that for 200 years. What does soon mean? Only in the sense of the New Testament, you know, he's coming soon. You find it there. So every believer really hopes that he'll come soon.
Yeah, this is what Big Tent Adventists talk about. They put soon into Protestant perspective, a biblical perspective, but it is not the official teaching of the Adventist Church that soon is the gospel Protestant, or even the apostles believed it was soon. It is a different thing to that. When Adventists officially, when the official Adventist teaching of soon is not what Bill Johnsson just said there. I agree with what Bill Johnsson just said there. I agree with the Big Tent Adventists on this. But it is not what the church officially teaches or has ever taught. So this idea that the Big Tent Adventists are going to somehow convince these traditional Adventists to change their official teaching and reason for believing is why I sometimes say to them, you guys have got your heads stuck in the sand. You're ostriches. Like, okay, if you don't believe that is fine. Stay in the church. Find your little bubbles that agree with you and don't believe it and want a more gospel Big Tent approach. That is awesome. But why do you keep saying publicly that the church doesn't really believe that? That's not my experience. The church was founded on that. The notion that it's happening any moment, and that we, the Adventist people, have a special message for these last days so that you can be ready for that imminent return. Agree with me? Not? Back to the program.
I hope he'll come soon. And for me, listen, I'm 85. He's coming soon for me. Really, what is more important, you know?
Yeah.
How we live, or whether we try to get all the calculations right to figure out when.
Does that make this, like, a lot of young people don't know what the investigative judgment even is? Is that good then? Is it better for this stuff just to kind of float away and...
Better than the way we used to teach it, to leave people in fear and doubt about their standing with God. That's terrible. You know, it's so anti-New Testament, anti-Jesus. You know, who taught.
Sorry, I just can't help myself. What he is saying there is that official teaching of Adventism is so anti-New Testament, is what he said. I've had John Rosier on the program, and he will be a part of this series as well, say it is anti-gospel. I've had Milton Hook say it is anti-Jesus, anti-Christ, anti-Christian. And I'm constantly amazed that these guys can say that the original Adventist teaching is anti-Jesus, anti-gospel, anti-New Testament. But when some of us also chime in and say that, we are attacking the church. How is it? Like, I don't get that still to this day. Is it the way they say it? Is it the way they've remained in the church and are still offering hope, false hope? Is it because they're speaking in terms of Big Tent and love everybody and Jesus first? By the way, it's anti-New Testament, that it goes unnoticed? Does it go under the radar? I'm really interested in your thoughts on that.
The kingdom of God has come now. Okay. It's good news. It's here.
Mm.
And
See, everything there that he is saying is from the Bible, is gospel. But the very unique core belief of Adventism is anti-New Testament. The way Adventists have taught it, as Bill just said, those teachings are anti-New Testament. So if you're in the movement to bring about some kind of change more in line with the Bible, and you think you're, someone on the watchtower doing good, which I did for all my life, thinking that I was bringing about some change in a positive way, good, fine. However, at least be as brave as Bill was there to say that our original teachings, the teachings of Ted Wilson, in fact, the teachings of Ellen G. White, are anti-New Testament. Say that publicly. You won't, because you'll get in trouble. But I'm so glad for people like Bill Johnsson, who had this interview with me, and as a retiree, no longer employed, was able to speak these truths. So there's the Bible gospel that he talks about that is in line with Protestantism and is in line with the biblical gospel. And then there's the way Adventism was originally taught, or as I say, originally came into actual being. That is anti-gospel, anti-New Testament, anti-Christian, in my humble opinion. Said with love. What do you think?
so that's part of the bad theology. The
Bad
other
theology.
side, there's a good side to our emphasis on what we call the investigative judgment. At Glacier View, we turned away. In the consensus statement, we talk about the pre-Advent judgment rather than the investigation. Wrong connotation. But the idea of judgment is a biblical teaching, Old Testament and to New Testament. And it's in Jesus, the words and teachings of Jesus. But in the judgment, God is on our side. That's the point. He's not trying to keep us out of heaven. He's trying to get us into heaven. But what form that judgment takes, I don't think there are books, and people thumbing through the pages.
Yeah. If there was, evidence that 100% proved that nothing happened October 22, 1844, you'd still remain an Adventist?
Yeah, because I am, first of all, a follower of Jesus. Okay. I'm an Adventist not because of the church, but because of Jesus. Okay. And I've part of my work toward the end, especially, was I was involved in interfaith dialogues, a lot of them, as a member of the dialogue team for 25 years, and then as the chairman of the team. And we've met with pretty well all the major denominations, not the Catholic Church, but the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Baptists and Salvation Army. You think we've got problems? You ought to sit down with them. But when you get to know each other and they open up, boy, we don't have problems compared with what they have. Okay.
Yeah.
But they're wonderful people.
See, I see that as a diversionary tactic there. And a lot of people say that to me every week. Oh, look, every other denomination, you think we've got problems, they've got problems. Everyone has got problems. We know that. That's not in any way something that we are questioning. It is deeper than that. Adventism is making very bold claims that need to be open with to having those bold claims questioned and queried, because if they are correct, then Ellen White's claims are pretty important. if they're incorrect, then what is being said is way more of a theological problem and issue and mental health inducing bad things badly, more than just another denomination that has faults and flaws. I can't find a former, Baptist kind of channel. What flourishes are those who are questioning Mormonism, JWs, and Seventh-day Adventists. There's something to be seen here, and to suggest that, oh well, all other churches have problems. That's let's just work with the ones that we have. And to me, it's like a nothing to see here kind of statement. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, said Carl Sagan. Okay, back to the program.
People out there, I believe this is the remnant church, in the sense that we are part of God's people that He has. He's always had a remnant, always, and we'll have in the last days. We'll be loyal and faithful to Him, and we'll meet Him when Jesus comes back.
You'll see here Lance, who in many ways initiated this actual conversation. So we thank you, Lance, for that. Lance is a 21-year-old studying theology. I think he's in his third year. Is that right, Lance?
Yeah.
And he wrote to me. He'd listened to some of the SDAQ&A podcast. He said, "Oh, it'd be fascinating to have Pastor Johnsson on your podcast." And I said, "Oh, look, that would be impossible. I'm sure we could never organise that." And next minute he writes back to me an email, and he'd contacted you, and you'd graciously said yes, you would chat with us. So Lance, we thank you for that. And then that triggered this whole, hey, let's chat to people about Glacier View this in the month of May, which may go into June a little bit. So I'm going to get Lance to ask you some questions in a moment from a young person's perspective. So Lance, over to you.
Okay, hi, Dr. Bill.
Hi.
Greetings from Mountain View College. I have a few questions here, Dr. Bill. How do you want the Glacier event to be remembered, especially for the young people? Because for most of us, for those who are interested, they kind of view Glacier View and Desmond, especially like he was some sort of a Adventist boogeyman who was out to destroy the church. Sort of, how do you want it to be remembered, especially for the young people?
Well, let me start with Desmond, okay, where I stand. Des was my friend, okay, and colleague. We never worked together, we never taught together, but I'd say we loved each other, respected each other. It hurt me enormously with the way things happened after Glacier View. And even until recent years, I was part of efforts to try to bring about a reconciliation of Des with the church in the South Pacific. Went to his daughter, Ellen, who's a very sharp person, wonderful person. She hoped that she could facilitate a reconciliation. She asked me if I'd be part of it, and I agreed. And we went to Australia, but it fell apart. Basically, I think in church politics, it fell apart. So let me just say that, Lance, first of all, Des, I think, was an Adventist tragedy. I think he made a big contribution to the church in helping people to find the assurance of salvation. That is a huge contribution. But I think he is also a tragic figure in that he was so sure he was right. He found it difficult to listen to others and to think that others might have something to help him with. It really concerned me very much. This 14-member committee that met with him prior to Glacier View to go over his book that he was writing, that he accepted not one idea. Now, I mean, these are all PhDs, okay? Old Testament experts, theologians, New Testament, okay? Is he the only one who's right? Okay. So that's a weakness he had and had to his dying day, I think. He was too sure he was right.
I just can't let that go. I'm sorry. He was too sure he was right. When Des claimed that these guys were on board with him, he wasn't saying at all that they agreed with every detail. He wasn't saying that they didn't disagree. He was simply saying that the sanctuary investigative judgment teaching was not biblical, and that most of these guys, including Bill Johnsson, agreed with that. And to say that, I think he said just then, even now, he has this problem. That, to me, is just classic Adventist ad hominem attack. If you can attack the player and not the ball, if you can make them appear to be somehow flawed in character, you invalidate what they say. Interestingly, they don't do that to their own profit. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. I really don't like when Des Ford is disparaged in such a way.
And so when, after he passed, I wrote a little piece. It was on the Spectrum blog. Desmond Ford, The Perils of Being Right. I think it's not just Des Ford. Over and over, we Adventists, we've got to be right. You know, I'm right and you're wrong. Hey, God is the one who knows it all. We don't know it all. Okay? So humility is very much in order. So I would like Des Ford to be remembered not as someone who tried to destroy the church. I think he loved the church. I think he had a pastoral interest in his work in the ministry. He met too many members who were unsure whether when they died they'd be saved. Unsure. A terrible way to live as a Christian. And that stemmed from the investigative judgment idea. I think that's what drove Des in many respects. So remember Des as a man who I think was a very important person, maybe a great person, but who was flawed, as we're all flawed, okay? And Glacier View, I think, was a tragedy, okay? It was an opportunity missed. But the strange and amazing thing is that Des's ideas eventually carried the day in the West. I'm not sure that they did it.
So he's saying there that Des was immovable and stubborn and had these problems, and yet his ideas took hold eventually. And he's pleased about that and hopes he's remembered for that. If Des hadn't been, hey, this is what I believe in such a decisive, clear fashion, you wouldn't be able to refute or discuss or disagree or agree. You need a clear claim to be able to dispute. And B, if he hadn't done it so clearly, it may not have made as much sense. By the way, those watching, in some parts of the States are saying the audio is cracking up every now and again. Is that everybody's experience? Please let me know. Back to the show. And not too much to go yet. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Around the world, even today, because much of the church in the developing world is still sort of 19th century theology. Don't want to put them down, it's just that here in the West we've had longer to grow and to develop.
I think most of the people here are still very much traditionalistic in their theology, especially here in the Philippines where it's still that way. And most of the people I think who know about the Glacier View event don't know about the 10-point statement and that it was not voted on. And it was, I think,
never discussed, never voted.
So my next question is, if the consensus statement was followed and if Desmond stayed within the church, because since you said that he accepted it, what do you think would be the church's plans going forward if that was the case?
Who knows? Des had so many talents. He was, in his nature, he was a wonderful debater. Use that in a positive sense. He actually, when he was in the ministry, he debated with ministers of other churches and just creamed them, you know. He's just a powerful debater. His natural way of presenting was, it's not this, it's that, even in his sermons, over and over. Not this, that. Debating style. But that also has the impact of audience sort of not agreeing with him, but taking the other side. So, you know, it's a great failure of the church not to recognize what he had to give to the church. He could have been used in ways, you know, to build up the church and to put it forward. But again, he would have to be ready to accept to work within certain limitations and to be patient, you know. Religious organizations, all of them, not just Adventists, are slow to change. Okay.
I think I edited a question out here. It might still come, I don't know. But I at this point, I remember asking him, how did that work out for you, being patient for the last 40 years? And with in light of the current compliance document, Ted Wilson in again, as predicted. I must be a prophet. But I think that put him on the spot, and I may have edited that out. We'll see. I'm not sure. But I did say to him, well, how did that work out for you?
And they never say, this doctrine that we've held for 500 years is wrong. You find the Catholic Church coming up and saying that. They won't. Okay. The Presbyterians used to, I mean, with John Calvin, this idea of election, you know, and predestination, major doctrine. Today, they don't talk about it. You know, in one of our dialogues, we met with over in Geneva from the World Presbyterian organizations. We brought up predestination. Guess what? They didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to even answer a question. It's an embarrassment to them. And you see, so doctrines that are wrong, they gradually fall away.
But not in Adventism.
But Des wasn't prepared for that. You know, he wanted to fight. Okay, now.
Also, I want to speak about this. I'm going to invite Robert Burnsmead in a future episode. What can you say about his indirect connection to the PUC Forum and then the Glacier View?
Well, I really don't have particular knowledge on that. Robert Burnsmead and I were fellow students at Avondale College, so I knew him quite well. At that time, he was very much a sort of a last generation person. He used to quote Ellen White by the paragraph, and everybody would sort of stand back and sort of amazed. No one went and actually checked whether he was quoting correctly. He probably was, but he was sort of like considered an amazing person. But he was very much a perfectionist. He started a movement. Well, by the way, for the final year at college, we would have graduated in the same class. The college wanted him to sign a statement that he would not preach certain doctrines as a student, okay? Because we used to go out preaching. Do you do that? Go out and preach around the churches. But
Yeah.
he'd go out and preach about Armageddon and so on, and the churches would get upset and would come back to the teachers, what's happening with your students, they're just messing up the churches. And so he was asked to sign a statement. He refused, and so he was not accepted back. He never graduated. So at that point, he was far, far right, okay. He started a movement called the Sanctuary Awakening Fellowship, pulled in a number of ministers. And the heart of that was that the cleansing of the sanctuary is the cleansing of the human heart before Jesus comes, meaning we have to be perfect. That's before Jesus will come. It's the soul temple that must be cleansed. That's where he was. And he was there for a number of years, and then guess what? He flipped totally to the other side and started Verdict magazine, which was all justification, justification, justification. And, we were in India, and he was in Australia, so couldn't follow closely, but he eventually abandoned everything,
See, he says the word again. He flipped as if he was irrational and illogical person. Oh, look, he's flip-flopped from one thing to the other. Not the case. And maybe it's saw the light or did progress with information he'd learnt and studied and came to new conclusions and was courageous and had the ability to let go of things that were in the pocket that should have been hidden, and was actually more willing to just publicly say what his new explorations had discovered. And I respect Bob Brinsmead for taking that course of action and being able to go, you know what, I was wrong, or I found this new stuff. And wherever that took him is fine, because he is a man that was truly on a path to educate himself and learn more, and he was hungry and inquiring mind. So again, I'm just pointing out these subtle ad hominem attacks. And I don't want to put Bill down for this, because I really enjoyed chatting with him and think he was a really great man that contributed so much to the planet and to Adventism. What I'm suggesting is I'm not attacking Bill. I'm just saying this is an Adventist default. Oh, we don't like what's being said. We can't cope with the criticism. Let's put down the person. And they do it without thinking, without even thinking.
I think the last issue of Verdict that I saw, he was into form criticism of the Gospels. I thought, he's on a trajectory that's going to take him right away from faith. And that's what happened.
Thank you, Dr. Bill.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance. They were very insightful questions. I think this young man's going to go a long way, don't you, Bill?
Yeah, Lance, let me ask you a question now, okay?
Just before Bill asks him that question, and thanks very much to Lance Cameron for really being the person that organized this interview. He had contacted me. I was about to let SDAQ&A totally go. I'd done one season over, I think, 27 interviews over a 2-year period. And or maybe longer. And I was about to let it go. He wrote to me and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in the interviews you did with Des Ford. He mentions Bill Johnsson. Why don't you get Bill Johnsson on the show?" And I was like, "No, can't make that happen." Anyway, you've heard me tell this story before, but that's Lance right there that you just heard. That's the guy that SDAQ&A would not have taken off if it wasn't for him. I'd better give him royalties. Is that right, Lance? Would you like that? Of all the zero profit that I'm making. But anyway, I'm not complaining. I love doing this, and I'm so thankful, Lance, for organizing this very interview that you guys are watching now. Lance contacted me and said, "I've organized an interview with you and Bill Johnsson next week," and it was lockdown, and away we went, and the rest is history. So thanks, Lance. Now, if Lance is watching, Lance actually had 2 or 3 more questions he wanted to answer, but Bill Johnson's wife was starting to give us the wind up signal. Wrap it up now, guys. And so I had to cut Lance short there. But Lance, if you come on to one of these shows, see if you can remember what it was you were going to ask, and maybe we can extrapolate and speculate on what Bill would have said. So now he is about to ask Lance a question.
Okay.
What year are you in your studies?
I'm currently an incoming third-year student.
And it's 4-year degree?
Yeah.
Okay. And what are your plans? What do you hope to do?
I'm planning to go to IS.
Yeah. It's a good school.
Yeah.
I've been there, yeah. Yeah. I've given lectures at IS, yeah. So that's good. And will you work on a master's there or what?
Yeah, hopefully, God willing.
So you want to be a teacher or whatever?
Yeah, probably like you.
You've got a good mind, mother. But, could I just say one thing that may sound a bit strange?
Sure.
I've been involved in theology for many years. I've learned to have a certain distrust about theological studies because there's often a lot of pride involved. Mm. That's why if you want an ugly argument, a theological argument is hard to beat. The stuff that happens in theological arguments, trying to prove that I'm right and you're wrong, because then we bring in God and hell and heaven on our side, Your ideas would take us right down the road to perdition. And so this is not new. This goes right back nearly 2,000 years in the history of the Christian church. Ugly arguments in the early centuries even fought battles, actual battles over these sort of questions.
Pride, power, money, and ego.
Yeah, but you know what? I just want to say this. It's all about Jesus, okay? And it's not what we believe, but who we believe, and who we know. And it's about living as Jesus lived. We feel privileged. We live in Loma Linda, and I taught in retirement. I taught for several years in the School of Religion. Okay, taught the Jesus and world religions, but everything at Loma Linda is concerned about health, about better living. Okay, about making men and women whole. So you don't have theological arguments around here. Why? This is a place, it's a big institution. I mean, it has 15,000 plus employees, the university and hospital. It has 8 hospitals, actually. But people are concerned with saving the lives of people who are dying, suffering and dying. And in that context, all these theological arguments, they really shrink. they really shrink.
Yeah, I just see that as another diversionary tactic, unfortunately. And again, not attacking him, but it's just some kind of Adventist thing to do. Whereas, oh, look, if you guys want to fight over theology and forget the important things like Jesus and healing people at hospitals, if you want to focus on that, that's fine. Away you go. It's totally fine. You do both. You can focus on Jesus and the hospitals and the healing of the people, and also getting your theology as close to what Jesus wanted you to have it as. Because to be quite honest, Ellen White's infusion, her paraphrase of the Bible, her prequel to the Bible, her post-assessment writings of what's going to happen after the biblical apocalypse, I think hinder people to a great degree. And I think you can end up feel like you're swimming with buckets. So I think go for it. Jesus first. Focus on that. Focus on healing and helping people and the good things that happen at hospitals and all those wonderful things. That's great. Happy Sabbath. Enjoy your haystacks. Big tent, vision. That's great. But you are also allowed to scrutinize truth claims. That's all. Back to the program.
Thank you.
By the way, is Dan Jackson still president of
Yes.
North American Division, is it?
Yeah, but he's retiring. Whether he'll hang on to next year, I don't know. He's waiting to get out. He's had a tough job.
I loved him. Did he call a lot of what was said hooey? Is that the word he used?
Yeah.
I thought this guy is an interesting guy.
He is. He's Canadian.
Is he really? Yeah. Hey, maybe you can put a good word in and we'll try and get him to do an interview with us.
You can hear the humor there that Bill and I shared. And I don't know if it's captured on the unedited. I can't remember. Back then it was Zoom and you'd press record and then you'd go live, and it was two separate things. But what was recorded would be captured, the whole thing. And I can't remember if that happened with this one, but I do know that before we went live, he and I were laughing a lot about stuff. And when we finished, we were laughing a lot. So I guess some of you could hear what I'm saying as being critical of him. I really hope that doesn't come across. I try and tease apart what it is people that are saying that I don't agree with from the person. And he, of all people I've interviewed, he's in the top 10 of he and I laughing a lot beforehand and afterwards. And I think that comes through occasionally in this interview, and it just did then, where we we both saw the humor in the situation.
Probably after he gets out Monday, the poor guy he looks tired, he's worn out, and it's not been easy. He defends the North American Division, which of course is in the black pages of the General Conference. Again, come to Pacific Unions. You just we are free out here, okay, and it may sound arrogant, but it's being realistic. Pacific Union, if the General Conference vanished, Pacific Union would go on. Hardly miss a beat. May go on better.
Maybe you should split and start your own church, and I'll join.
Well, of course, you have to realize this is part of the bigger political scene here. California, it is the 6th largest economy in the world. The state of California.
Incredible.
So why not start a new country here and let the other crazies everywhere?
You can have a chat to your friend Ben Carson and see if he's got any influence on that.
Well,
Watch this. This part of the conversation shuts down very fast. You watch.
Ben,
I think we'd better leave that one.
yeah, I better.
Yeah. That's fine.
I'll zip my lips.
That was more of a joke.
I'll zip up my lips now.
So one last thing I'm wanting you to do, like when the vote, just to comment on, when the vote came out in I think 2015 at the GC, and it kind of went not so well for women's ordination, and many people were hurt and felt devastated by that vote. I myself, afterwards, I said to a friend of mine, I will not be a Seventh-day Adventist by my next birthday. Yeah. And so I left the church by my next birthday, because I've got a little 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they were much younger then, of course. But I didn't want to bring them into an environment where they would possibly grow up and feel a sense of suppression. And also I had troubles with the 1844 and the investigative judgment. So I'm not encouraging people to leave, but for me it was a wonderful experience. But I very much, in a sense of a relief, but I very much enjoy my connections with my Adventist friends and family, and so I'm not encouraging anyone, of course, to leave, but you've got to become your own person and make your own decisions and follow your own path. And I think one of the things I've respected about you over the years is you've obviously got to be careful what you say, but you've also been able to say what's true to your conscience as well, as you have done today. So to finish on, I'm wondering if you can give some encouragement to women in the church, particularly younger women that may want to become ordained pastors. Is there hope for them in their lifetime? What kind of inspiration can you and wisdom?
In their lifetime, Peter, come to the Pacific Union. We've got dozens of ordained women pastors, dozens, and they continue to be ordained. Mm. And also in the Columbia Union, it's happening. You can't hold back the dawn.
Do you fear sanctions because of your being
no.
document?
No. Those things. Yeah, listen.
We better leave that one.
I better leave it. Okay.
Okay.
I don't fear. But in terms of your reaction to that session vote,
I don't fear, but I better leave that one. Better not talk about it. I don't fear any ramifications, but I better leave that one alone right there.
That troubled me so much. I only got peace by writing the book, Where Are We Headed? Mm. The book came directly out of that concern.
Mm. It's a very good book.
I felt it was not just disappointing, in many ways it was disgraceful. I saw it as political manipulation. Mm. Much more I could say, but I've gone on from there and disappointed, but my eyes are on Jesus, they're not on whoever. Mm. I still have good friends there. Interesting sidelight. Nathan Brown, good Aussie. You know Nathan?
Yeah, we've interviewed Nathan on the podcast.
He wrote a review of my book, which was published in the review paper I used to edit. As a result of that, the editor got taken to the woodshed, and Nathan was told, never write for us again.
Whoa.
Yeah, I heard that from Nathan himself. But
wow.
That is sad. But Nathan, when he told me, he laughed. And that's the best thing. Laugh at it because it's petty, it's crazy.
I'm amazed how often I laughed at that kind of thing too. Like, oh yeah, I just got called a tool of Satan. Oh, what, they pulled the power out on your PA when you were playing music. Oh, you lost your job, or because you spoke up too much. You know what? I don't think there comes a time to stop laughing about that and realize how seriously stupid it is and shameful that the majority of people in the Adventist church can't speak their unique version of Adventism without fear of job loss, suppression, being marginalized. It's time to stop the laughing, but it is funny as well in some ways.
It is
Laugh
crazy.
at it. Yeah, you know.
Well, I've watched a lot of your online YouTube clips and stuff, as I have from the Standish Brothers to you name it. I've devoured it in my lifetime because I'm just absolutely fascinated by Adventist history and politics and theology. And but the one that really stands out to me is one where you were speaking in Sydney for the One Project. Can you just finish by sharing us some of that love, some of that passion to lift us all up and give us a sense of hope and positivity?
Listen, the church is broken. The Adventist church is broken, but maybe it's not broken as much as other churches out there. Only the Lord knows. But we have a great Lord, and He's compassionate. And grace, man, grace is like a tide. It's like a fountain. You know, it overflows, and it's unstoppable. You've got this guy, Lance Cameron, lovely guy, okay. But this is part of the Adventist church, okay. This is what is happening around the world. You've got young people, you know, all around the world, especially in the developing world, who have been given opportunities and they develop themselves and they become leaders, they become wonderful, wonderful men and women. Leaders in society, yeah, some of them become major leaders in society, leaders in the church. It's a strange church. It's a mixture of so much that is not what it ought to be, even ugly. Times, ugly Adventists are really ugly. You know what I mean by ugly, mean-spirited, really hateful. On the other hand, the most loving people I know are Seventh-day Adventists, okay? It's a church of great contrast, okay? But the Lord is here and working out. I think He's working not just among us, but He is working among us and doing wonderful things like Lance Cameron and Loma Linda, the men and women who give themselves, and the nurses, especially now at this time of this plague. So yeah, I'm proud to be a Seventh-day Adventist. I really am. At times I'm ashamed of it, but overall I'm proud to be a Seventh-day Adventist.
Well, I think that's the perfect few sentences to bring our wonderful discussion to a close. I can't say how much we appreciate you giving of your time, and thank you, Nolene, there too. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure this will trigger a lot of people to have conversations on the Facebook wall where we've gone live today. And
Okay.
if you wanted to join into the fray, feel free to become a member of the group. I highly recommend, if people want to find out what you think and what your answers to pretty much most of your questions that they might have about you can be found by looking you up on YouTube and by buying your books.
Yeah, I have a bunch of them.
Yeah, yeah.
The last several books I've written without any return. Okay, and I don't need the money, and that just sort of frees me up. I'm not writing to please the publisher, just writing to give my own thoughts.
Yeah. Look, we wish you well. I know about the health issue. I didn't want to raise it at all today in case it was something you didn't want to talk about, but we're all thinking of you, and we really hope that you are not being put under too much stress, pressure, anxiety, etc. during the...
Well,
treatment,
You
etc.
know, it's really the old saying, one day at a time. It's
Exactly.
really not like that.
Live in the moment.
For the last few weeks, one day at a time has just been terrific. For some reason, I have more strength, and I'm just feeling so much better.
Yeah.
And we're walking every day, and we're enjoying life. Nolene has been just, and still is just, a wonderful companion.
We'll say farewell for now. Really appreciate your contribution. Until next time, we will see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
And so there we have it. And wow, what a little trip down memory lane there. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Next week, I will be sharing my interview with Dr. John Godfrey. And after about 2 or 3 interviews, the visual and the audio starts getting better. And I apologize if there were any glitches today. Darren Pratt writes, "Thanks, Bill Johnsson, for your honesty." Bill did national service with Darren's father in South Australia years ago. And look, it was an absolute pleasure to have Bill Johnsson on the program. That interview that you just watched changed my life. I now do SDAQ&A 3 times a week, and every week we will continue with one of these episodes, and we will also be having a weekly interview. Next week, my interview is with, let me quickly bring it up, Carrie Walden, I think it's pronounced Nennick. Her and her husband will be joining me and sharing their story. And tomorrow, Emma Ray is joining me and you all for our weekly Good News Fellowship. She's going to unpack how atonement and justification is presented in the book of Romans, and also at a later date, the practical application of acceptance of the gospel in the later chapters of Romans. So that's tomorrow, same time. But yeah, so good to see you guys, and thanks for joining in with the conversation. We will be back with more very soon. See you later.